question to you is, from your previous experience when you were at a family foundation, for instance, what makes a proposal successful or sort of less successful? What are your top sort of tips for that? And what do you look for in a proposal?
So I love when an organization has done their homework. It becomes really clear when they've read the guidelines or they like have a clear idea of what we do, because their proposal will be personalized and customized to the work of the foundation. And it's really helpful when there's a clear ask, especially upfront, not have it buried at the very end. And with just a clear statement about either how the project connects to the funder's goals or how the organization's work connects to the funder's goals. So outline like, so being clear about like connecting the dots basically for the funder, because oftentimes when I've seen some proposals is they tend to be more scattershot, and it's like really clear that they've just sent a cookie cutter proposal to like a bunch of funders in hopes that one of them will read it and like want to fund them. And I see a proposal more as like a cover letter for a job where you have to customize it a bit and show that like, you know what they're all about. Because do you even want to work with a funder if they don't share the same values as you? Because otherwise they're going to have some of those horror story experiences. I think strong proposals also are able to elaborate on the need. So like why now, or like why your organization, making that really clear for the funder. So sharing that, what's the window of opportunity? Because funders are often trying to juggle like what is most urgent versus most important versus like what something long-term that we should support versus the short-term. So some funders are like much more oriented, more rapid response, like being really nimble. And then some are thinking way ahead and maybe want to support more systemic change work. I think what's also helpful sometimes with projects is having timelines and expected outcomes and how you'll evaluate them. I think really often there's sometimes goals that are set and it's not clear like how they actually measure success. So being able to include that. Other things that have been helpful, I think if you're more of a startup organization, it's really helpful to know the track record of the leadership that's running the organization. So if you don't have that organizational track record because you're so new, I think knowing like what has the management or staff or board who's part of this org, like what have they been able to do together in the past or on their own. So sort of demonstrating that like you have that leadership. I think sharing key partners is also really helpful. So not only that might not just be funders that are already supporting your work, because that helps for funders who are more hesitant to support like early stage things or things that are requesting seed funding, they like to see that other people are already in support of your mission. And so that helps them, give them the extra push. But also I, as a funder, really like seeing who are you collaborating with. So I think what often happens is that philanthropy really creates this competitive, like pits nonprofits against one another, because they're often asking like, what makes you so unique compared to like all these other similar organizations? And what I prefer to ask is, who are you in relationship with? Because I see each nonprofit as complementing each other's work and each of them having their own strengths in which they can benefit their communities. And so I like to know who else are you working with in that particular issue area or sector. I think also in part because I also want to know, like, do you actually know who's around you? I think especially if you're an earlier organization, if you don't mention any of these other similar orgs, I wonder if you've really done your homework. And if you're someone who wants to collaborate with others, or if you're someone who just wants to be like the pioneer or the best in the field. And that's something that I personally am like resistant against, both on the funder side and the nonprofit side. I wish funders also like wouldn't push that competitive nature. And I also wish funders themselves would collaborate more, especially if they're asking nonprofits to collaborate. Those are most of the things. I think being able to share like a track record of success for your organization, like that just really shows your capacity and your credibility and your commitment to achieving some success. If you are replicating any existing models, that's really helpful, especially if your work may be based on like best practices or promising practices, being able to cite that as evidence that like this is something we're doing in this particular city that's been done elsewhere. That just creates some legitimacy to what you're building. And then I think focusing also on what are the outcomes and impact, and not just like the inputs and outputs. So like inputs would be like the people and resources to like make your programs and services happen. And then the outputs typically are the quantitative things like the number of people you served or hours of programming. Funders really like to see what are the outcomes. So what have been the change in stakeholders or the change in your beneficiaries? And harder to measure, but I think funders really care about is impact. What's that change in your community on a larger scale? And then let's see what else. And if there's any ways to like include other sources when referring to research, be sure to do that. Because I've often seen proposals that will state certain statistics or statements, and it's not clear like where this information came from. I'm really big on attribution. So that's something I personally like to see. Other things, yeah, I think if you've done your homework, it becomes a lot easier to write the proposal, because like you're writing to, you're basically trying to, like, I think with employers, as with funders, like they're trying to support or like fund the thing that is like within their issue area. So they are excited to read proposals that are just like, you are the answer to like figuring out, to achieving our own mission and goals. So I think it's important if you're able to make that clear to them. But I also think in a proposal or in an LOI, like a letter of inquiry, like if you can be really clear and like have some brevity in it and not go on and on. Like I personally don't like a lot of jargon in my proposals. I want to be able to tell like what exactly it is you're doing and not have it covered up in buzzwords, because otherwise what happens is it tends to sound very similar to a lot of other nonprofits because they're all using that same buzzwordy language. So I think just being really upfront about like these exactly our programs and this is how we do them is helpful.